Hi, welcome to our federal funding webinar. I'm Jeffrey Canada, president of the Harlem Children's Zone and executive director of the William Julius Wilson Institute. We're so thrilled you could join us today. We're at a particularly crucial time in our country. All of us currently who are working to help save children and families in this country, we face something we've never faced before. The crisis that existed before COVID was severe and tested us to our limits. Subsequent to COVID, we know that our communities are in dire straits. But here at the William Julius Wilson Institute, we believe there's an answer. We think it's building strong partnerships so that we can create cradle-to-career opportunities for children throughout this country. So with this crisis looming, we also have one of the largest opportunities to use public funding in the history of our country. President Biden has directed dollars and real resources to distressed communities to help us. Our webinar today wants to introduce you to some options that we hope you will consider in building out your cradle-to-career pathways. Now, a lot of you may know that President Obama created Promised Neighborhoods based on our efforts here at the Harlem Children's Zone, but you probably don't know that we have used federal dollars to help build out our cradle-to-career pathways. So if you didn't know, you're lucky, because we're joined with our CEO, Kwame Usakesi, and I'm going to ask Kwame, could he just say a little bit about our use of federal funding to build cradle-to-career pathways?
Good afternoon or good morning, everyone. Welcome. As Jeff said, I'm Kwame Usakesi, the proud CEO of the Harlem Children's Zone. And we have a legacy of leveraging federal dollars, particularly when we think about the early stages of the Harlem Children's Zone. So with the earliest stages of our pipeline with Early Head Start and Head Start, and our long-term partnership with AmeriCorps and how that was such critical support for our youth development programming. And as I think about the options that are available to the country today, and again, just the history of our programming. So when I think about the work Jeff, you and others did in terms of our Beacon programs and how that is so closely related to the work happening with community schools and the advocacy work that you all have done to be able to make that a possibility for this country. Additionally, the work that we're doing with two of our housing developments in the zone is such critical aspects to our cradle-to-career efforts, and we know the availability of funds with choice neighborhoods is a great support for the nation. So when you talk about the relationship with leveraging federal dollars in order to be able to execute cradle-to-career work with excellence, the two are intimately tied to one another. So it is our hope, and we take it on as our responsibility, that this is not going to be a one-time webinar, a one-time seminar. We are committed to make sure that we are continuing the conversation about best practices of not only applying for federal dollars, but how to manage the grant. So we have every intention to continue to host webinars, to leverage our website as a resource, to make information available to you on our respective journeys in order to be able to leverage this unique opportunity in this moment in time in this country. So we're really excited for the agenda that we have for you today. And I would like to take this opportunity to pass it to one of our dear partners in this work, who is the Chief Investment and Impact Officer of Blue Meridian Partners, Mr. Jim Shelton.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's very exciting to be here with you today. As you know, we are all invested in trying to create great opportunities and communities for all of our young children, and frankly, their families. One of the things that it's interesting for me to think about a lot from my seat is that philanthropy is by far not enough. That the only way to actually get to the kinds of outcomes, and especially to sustain those outcomes the way that we've talked about over time, is to be able to do it through the use of public funding strategically in support of our efforts. So I'm excited that the William Julius Wilson Institute today has brought us together to hear about the opportunities to use federal funds for that purpose. But the reality is that those funds will be catalytic to use of all of the public funds, be they state or local, in supporting and sustaining this work. With that, I will begin to get out of your way and say that please take every opportunity in this moment to both take notes and figure out how you understand how these funds will braid in and catalyze other funds in your communities. Take care.
Thank you, Jim. Great to be with you as always. You're one of our most important partners, and we're glad we got your voice in today. So I'm excited to bring in an illustrious panel of folks from both the federal policy side and the practitioner side to talk through some of the great federal opportunities. As we know, again, this is an unprecedented time, as Jeff mentioned, and as Kwame touched on. It's been a part of our story at HCZ, and we think it's going to be a part of the story for the future of place-based work in this country. So with that, understanding time is limited, I'm not going to read full bios, but give you just a little bit of context for the folks we'll be greeting on the webinar shortly, and excited to kick off the conversation. So first off, we have Dreama Gentry, Executive Director of the newly minted Partners for Rural Impact. So a lot of exciting work happening out there in Berea, Kentucky, and looking forward to hearing from you, Dreama. We have Lucy Blackburn, the Director of the Choice Neighborhoods Initiative at HUD. We also have Kylene Hashim, the Deputy Director of Choice Neighborhoods at HUD. We have Aaron McGrath, the Director of Regional Operations at AmeriCorps. And finally, Elsa Nash, the Director of School Choice and Improvement Programs at the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education for the U.S. Department of Ed. So just want to thank you all again for joining us. I understand they're popping on screen, and want to get right into it. So appreciate your willingness to share some of your experiences and your expertise with us. And wanted to start with a question for the group. So we're going to cycle through. We've got about 40 minutes for the conversation, so we do ask that you keep your remarks relatively brief. For starters, understanding that we've seen unprecedented opportunities for place-based work, both with the budget that was recently passed, our infrastructure bill, COVID relief packages. I'm just wondering, what's most exciting to you if you look at all these opportunities? If you could pick one really just transformational initiative, what would that be for you and why? And let's begin with Lucy.
The Choice Neighborhoods program is probably one of the best tools that are out there right now for redeveloping communities, helping residents, and addressing the need for affordable housing. So while it's not a new initiative, we've been around for 11 years, it's an initiative where funding has been increasing every year. And we're happy to report that in fiscal year 22, we received a budget of $350 million, which is more than we have ever received. So we're looking forward to promoting our program and to getting participation up and interest in it. So that would probably be my number one initiative. Great,
thank you. Moving right along, Elson, can you share more about what excites you with these new opportunities for place-based work?
Most definitely. My excitement comes with full-service community schools. Similar to Choice Neighborhoods, we have unprecedented support and unprecedented increase in funding. What's even more exciting that's relevant to this panel is that we're also seeing states adopt full-service community schools at incredible levels. The state of California has adopted full-service community schools at a level of about $2 billion. And that was leveraging ARP funds. So if you want to look for something that is exciting, that provides an opportunity to collaborate across federal agencies, and even at the state level, I would say full-service community schools.
Great, thank you. Aaron, can you follow up?
Yeah, well, for AmeriCorps, ARP doubled our federal appropriation, which is a big deal for us. And so obviously there's a lot of opportunity for expansion. I think there are two features of it that really excite me. The first being that it has allowed us to increase the baseline living allowance for our AmeriCorps members, making those positions more competitive and opening the opportunity for more folks. There is a component to ARP that is like a little less flashy than growth and expansion, which is really, I think, having spent 10 years on the grantee side and now just about 10 years on the federal side, there are some administrative features that ARP has allowed us to trigger that make it easier to access our resources and to manage our funds. And so they're really sort of in the weeds, nerdy details, but I do think from a practitioner standpoint, it makes managing AmeriCorps resources much more accessible and reasonable. And so I think I'm really excited to see what we can do with those flexibilities.
Excellent, thank you. Now, Dreama, as a partner of the Wilson Institute, I know your team has been thinking a lot about how to manage this stuff on the ground level, and you've been really expert in sort of braiding and weaving in different funding streams. So I'm particularly curious in your perspective, which opportunities are really exciting you and the team right now, and what are some things folks should be paying attention to?
I think the folks that spoke before, it's the full service community schools, it's AmeriCorps, especially being able to make AmeriCorps service more equitable, and it's also choice neighborhoods. I think another piece too is USDA just rolled out a Rural Partners Network. That's not explicitly dollars hailing, but what it is, it's technical assistance on the ground for rural communities to think about how to wrap together and braid together multiple funding streams. And so I do think I'm very excited. We're a part of that Rural Partners Network, and there's places across the country. So we're really excited about that opportunity too.
That's great, thank you. And one thing I'm hoping will come across to folks is the opportunities folks might have to, again, integrate those funding streams, which is why we wanted this sort of cross-representation today. So I want to take it back to the HUD folks. So Lucy and Kylene, feel free to weigh in as you'd like to, but would love to just get a bit of a snapshot on choice neighborhoods. I know that may be one that is less familiar to folks given eligibility criteria and who we have in the audience, but if you could say a word about just choice neighborhoods as a snapshot, and then how you see our particular audience, which would be, community-based social sector organizations plugging in to this housing-oriented initiative.
Thanks for inviting us this afternoon, and we'll try to give you a very quick 5-minute overview of Choice Neighborhoods program. We won't be able to cover all the details, but we'll give you the highlights. So Choice Neighborhoods is a competitive grant program, which is managed out of the Office of Public Housing Investments at HUD headquarters in Washington. We're a place-based grant program, meaning our funds are targeted to specific neighborhoods, which are identified by our grantees. Through the program, we provide funding for 3 primary areas. One is to redevelop a specifically targeted HUD-assisted housing project, so not just any housing project. 2, revitalize the neighborhoods surrounding the target housing. And 3, to support the families that are living in the target housing. The Choice program is now in its 11th year. And as I mentioned before, we received $350 million this year. So we're thrilled to be able to provide more funding to the cities around the country. As I mentioned, we're a competitive grant program, and there are 2 different types of grants that we offer, a planning grant and an implementation grant. And each year, our office puts out a Notice of Funding Opportunity, NOFO, which you all may be familiar with that acronym. And we put out the NOFO and request submission of applications. So applications are received, reviewed, and scored by the Choice Neighborhood staff, and the highest scores are funded. The first type of grant is our planning grant. And if you think about it, before you can revitalize a neighborhood, you need a plan. And you need the plan which identifies the needs of the community and develops a strategy for addressing those needs. So Choice Neighborhoods planning grants provide the funding needed to undertake a comprehensive neighborhood planning process, the result of which is what we call a transformation plan, a plan for transforming the neighborhood into a place where current residents want to live and new residents want to come. The term of a planning grant is 2 years, and we offer up to $500,000 to pay for the planning process. And it involves extensive outreach to your housing residents, your neighborhood residents, partners, and public agencies, everybody. And applicants who can apply are cities, public housing authorities, and nonprofit groups. So once you've developed your transformation plan for your neighborhood, the next thing you want to do is implement it. And this is the hard part. We don't want our planning plans to sit on the shelf. So Choice Neighborhoods implementation grant funds are funds made available to implement a plan. Grantees can receive as high as $50 million for their implementation grants. And this is because most of your funds are going to be going to redeveloping your targeted public housing project. And this could have 800, even more units. So it's an expensive endeavor. But another portion of your grant, up to 15%, can be used for neighborhood improvements, and up to 20% can be used for resident services. That's services that are going to serve those that are living in your targeted housing project. So now I'm going to turn it over to Kylene and let her give you a few more details about our 3 goals and focus in on the people goal.
Great. And so, yeah, Lisa talked about that there's 3 different components for our program. So again, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that supportive services component, or as we call it, a people goal. The backbone of, and I'll be talking more from the implementation side, but remember in the planning grants, you are planning towards the same sort of expectations and strategies. So the backbone of the supportive services component is there is a supportive services lead organization that provides case management, really intensive case management to all of the families living in the target housing. This is extremely important for getting to build relationships with families, to understand and identify their needs, so that then services can be tailored and developed to meet those needs and to further those residents' goals. So that's sort of the backbone component. Then there are 3 sort of sub goals to the supportive services component, and that is income and employment. So actually supporting residents to attain living wage jobs, supporting them all the way through career exploration, direct connections to employment, as well as retention in those jobs, health, actually ensuring that folks have health insurance that are connected to medical homes, getting mental health and trauma-informed care needs taken care of, getting appropriate care for chronic health conditions. And then, most importantly to this group, right, education. So, and that is a cradle-to-career focus, where there's a strong focus on early learning, really working with families to identify their needs in terms of developmental screening, early education enrollment, and high quality early education, and also family support. So anything from home visiting to formal parent play groups and that sort of thing. And then on the school age side, supporting both school success and college and career ready graduation. So, developing programs that are tailored to individual family needs, whether it be tutoring, mentoring, working with schools in order to get real-time data. A lot of our grantees have education navigators who are specifically working with families and again, focusing on those individual students. So in a nutshell, that is sort of where we focus for that supportive services. And I will just say that our planning grant NOFA will be coming out soon, and we will have up to 20 planning grants available, which is very exciting for us. It's a big increase.
Awesome, thank you. One quick administrative follow-up question, because I know this might be of interest for a number of folks on the line. If you think about eligibility, my understanding is it's really a housing authority conversation that's going to anchor this work. How would you recommend that folks who are in our constituency engage in these efforts? How might they go about initiating the application process, understanding they may not be the primary entity lifted up in that application?
Well, for planning grants, nonprofit organizations could be eligible applicants, but I feel that collaborating with the city, obviously with the housing authority, if it is a public housing project that's being targeted, is important to make the grant successful. For implementation grants, cities and housing authorities are the key applicants. But partners are important to both of types of grants. So if your city is interested or has a neighborhood planning effort going on, I would suggest partners should be reaching out to the city, reaching out to the housing authority, and involving yourself in the process, because that's the best way, is to have a large group of people working together on our grants.
Sure. Thank you. And I imagine partnership is an element that's going to come up throughout the conversation today. And that brings me to Elson. So from the Department of Ed side, both Promise Neighborhoods and Full Service Community Schools are initiatives that really lean on this idea of collective impact, collective action. There are a lot of terms we use to describe this level of coordination that needs to happen on the community level. So Elson, if you wouldn't mind, we'd love for you to share a bit of a snapshot on both Promise and Full Service, and then in particular, how you think about the role of partnerships. So any advice you would have for folks who want to be competitive in this process, what it would look like to build or strengthen a partnership in service of their vision for a grant like this.
Yeah, absolutely. So Halen, you hit the nail on the head. This idea of partnerships for those two programs, Full Service Community Schools and Promise Neighborhoods, is essential. And we're not talking about your grandfather's partnership. We're talking about partnership from the sense of having a memorandum of understanding, the idea of having data-driven expertise and data-driven results where all partners come together. A snapshot for Promise Neighborhoods is to really look at results count. We took a chapter out of the Annie E. Casey Foundation, and we actually have our grantees go through results-based accountability training. And Dreama is smiling because she is an expert in that area. Why is that important? The notion of accountability of partners really stemmed from the work that you all are doing at Harlem Children's Zone, so that each partner is accountable to families and communities. And being able to, and check this out, it's in our statute, publicly show the results. That's something that is I think, innovative. It's something that Jim talked about early on in the creation of Promise Neighborhoods. And so then fast forward to Full Service Community Schools. This is something, it's a partnership between nonprofit organizations, school districts, i.e. consortia can apply. And so once again, this idea of collective impact around three key areas: academic support, personal support, family engagement, is critically important. And we see that as something that we want to show communities, and we want communities to be accountable to each other. So it is a different sense of collaboration. You'll see terms in our grant applications that point to this new way of doing business.
Thank you. And really encouraging to see this sort of incentivizing of partnerships on that level from the federal side. We think it does lead to better outcomes if accountability is really built into the center. Quick follow-up question for you, Elson. So when we think about the range of opportunities that are available, these are competitive grant opportunities that are exciting to many, but there are also formula dollars available. So could you just say a word about other opportunities that folks might want to pay attention to that aren't sort of the higher profile Promise or Full Service kind?
Absolutely. I mean, we have a whole range of formula programs ranging from each of the titles, Title I, Title II, Title III, Title IV. But I think what's important is this notion of us thinking about system change and breaking down the barriers and access for those funds. So I do want to point out a couple of things. Many of our programs have used 21st century community school funds that are accessed through the state. That's one level of easy access, I think, around formula funds. But then there's another initiative that we actually started in the Obama administration, and it's continuing now in the Biden administration, called the Performance Pilot Partnerships. That was something that was initiated for disconnected youth. There's actually a study out through Mathematica. And the idea is system change, lowering those barriers to access federal formula funds across federal agencies. That's where we want to go for our large initiatives. And I'm talking about collaboration with HUD, Department of Labor, agriculture. Those are the types of dollars, and that's the types of initiative that actually has been around for a few years, enough to have a Mathematica study. So the hope is that we can take that model and take it to the next level.
Thank you. Really appreciate that perspective, Alison. I want to talk a little bit more about AmeriCorps now. As Kwame mentioned earlier, we've been the beneficiary of those programs, and it's been a serious sort of employment pipeline for a lot of folks. We have longtime HCZers who were first introduced to the organization through their AmeriCorps journeys. So we'd love to hear more on this theme of partnership. So this fosters deep partnerships between the government and place-based service providers. And Aaron, if you wouldn't mind, would love to hear a little bit more about the kinds of organizations that are in the mix for deploying this core of folks, and the sorts of roles that you think would be critical for place-based work that folks are placed into as a result.
Yeah, the portfolio makeup is really interesting. You've got a decent slice of folks who've been around a long time. I see colleagues on this call that I know have been longtime champions for national service and for AmeriCorps, and grantees who've been around a long time and have gotten very sophisticated in how they think about the programs and how they manage the programs. I think one of the interesting things that I'm excited about as we look at how to leverage these ARP funds is really finding ways to bring new folks to the table. And so I think I want to take this opportunity to encourage folks to think about doing this for the first time if you haven't before, or to come back. I think there are a lot of opportunities. I think what I like most is that you've got a lot of small organizations who are managing smaller programs. We've got like this whole host of opportunities, different streams of service. This is a little bit of a bad analogy, partly because I'm not like that great with cars, but I think I like to think of the folks in our region offices who, you come in looking for a vehicle, right? Like, we've got this body of work that we want to get done. And we've got a team of people who are available to you to say, well, tell us more about what are you looking to do? Let's get you in the minivan. Let's get you in the pickup truck. Let's get you in the electric vehicle. There are multiple streams of AmeriCorps service, from that sort of intensive short-term service blast through our AmeriCorps NCCC program. There's the opportunity to really build internal infrastructure and capacity at an organization through AmeriCorps Vista. Those tend to be much smaller projects, 5 and up. And then, of course, we've got a lot of opportunities for the direct service component related to the AmeriCorps State and Nationals, what we call it. And then there's this really, I think, hidden gem within AmeriCorps that is designed to engage older adults in service and promote intergenerational programming through our AmeriCorps Seniors programs. And all of those program streams have opportunities available. And so we, I don't want to take the car metaphor too far, but we do have folks that really can help organizations find the right stream of funding for them. And so we've seen everything from state and local governments, but a lot of higher ed folks in the mix. And we've got, some smaller grassroots organizations that I think really add an important dynamic to the portfolio.
That's great. It sounds like there's a range of opportunities for folks in terms of how mature their organizational efforts are. One question I have for folks that are newer to the fold is around infrastructure. So I understand that it is a commitment when you think about bringing these new folks on, creating meaningful experiences, but also just from an administrative and reporting standpoint. So what advice would you give to an organization that may be pursuing this for the first time and may not know where to begin, application aside, just preparing your organizational system for what's required?
Yeah, we've got all of the things that I think everybody on this call has. There is an infrastructure for federal grants management that is required, right? There's the financial management component that is really important. I think the added piece for AmeriCorps is also thinking about the infrastructure you need to manage members, to manage the folks who are coming in to serve, because you've got the intervention, the work that they're doing to strengthen your organization and to build communities, but then that's an opportunity to really enhance their own experience, their pathway to employment. And so there is some, in addition to the financial infrastructure of any federal grant, there is this sort of member management component that folks have to think of. Everything from how do I recruit and find the right people, the right fit for these positions? What kind of training and onboarding and ongoing support do we need? And then how do we help them transition into the workforce. I know you said earlier at the start, lots of folks have started their career in AmeriCorps, and there are program managers all across the country trying to help those AmeriCorps members find the right next thing at the end of their term of service. And so there is an apparatus required, I think, for that member development piece that is unique to AmeriCorps, sort of managing the people part of it in addition to the financial resources.
Great, thank you, Erin. Yeah, it sounds like, I mean, HR, finance, grant management, operations, there are a lot of pieces that would need to come together. So a commitment that's worthwhile, but worth considering before an organization makes that leap. Thank you. So when I think about infrastructure on the place-based sort of scale, I can't think of many organizations that exemplify what best practice look like more than Dreama's team out in Berea, Kentucky. So we're excited to have you here today, Dreama, and I would love to hear a little bit more about your organizational journey and what it's taken for you to really develop that infrastructure. What have been your keys to success as someone who I would say has been quite successful in deploying federal dollars and securing those dollars?
Sure. Yeah, I think that for us, I think the reason that we did get so sophisticated in bringing in the public dollars is doing work in rural America. It was often the only dollars available for us. And so us being able to connect in with Promised Neighborhood, AmeriCorps, Gear Up, the TRIO programs, I think at one point we had 25 different federal funding streams that we were bringing into the same place, which is Appalachian, Kentucky. So I think I was thinking about the word infrastructure, and I think the first piece I suggest is that an organization that has not yet stepped into actually being the one to hold the federal grant and administer the federal grant really make sure that they have the ability and they have a shift in a mental model, and they're really ready to step into that role, because it does open up a whole other level of compliance and audit readiness and infrastructure requirements. It's very doable. I think the other mental model shift that has made us successful is when we think about the grants, we're thinking about it being an opportunity over 5 years to do really significant change, or 7 years to do significant change. I do think folks who haven't stepped into it think it's a grant that they can pay someone to write for them, right? And what we have found is we do have to have an infrastructure around grants management, and we have a phenomenal team that understands the compliance, they understand how to submit the grants, but the actual design of the program is critically important. And I would say for the leaders that are on the phone that are thinking, or on the Zoom thinking about this, you have to start thinking about spending time actually designing the grants. You have to have a strategic plan for your place, and the grants and the public dollars have to support you in getting where you want to go. This is not something that you can pay somebody to do for you. And I think about, full service community schools. If it's $500,000 a year to do a full service community school grant, if that was somebody walking in off the street that was going to give you $500,000, you wouldn't give that role to somebody who's doing a technical role. You would actually spend your own time, or leaders would spend their time in developing and designing the programs. So that's the mental model shift. You have to make sure you're ready for it, and you have to make sure that you're actually willing to spend the time designing the programs, because that's why we've been so successful, is because we spend our time doing that work.
So there's also a question for organizations that are sizing this up that may not have yet procured federal dollars, like whether or not it makes sense. So it sounds like having those systems in place is one critical component. But what else would you advise folks to consider if they're taking a sort of, call it an internal readiness assessment? Are we even at the point where we should be considering this? Do we think we can actually write the thing, let alone manage the thing? How would you sort of encourage folks to consider those trade-offs?
Yeah, I think it goes back to partnerships. And I think what I would encourage you to do is, first, you have to have a plan for your place and for moving those outcomes. And I think they have to be large population level outcomes. You have to really say, we have a plan to move third grade reading, or we have a plan to move high school graduation. And then you look at the partners around the table and determine which partner should take which role. And it could be that you're not the partner that's actually going to be the lead applicant. Maybe someone else already has an infrastructure for federal grants. I think it's also important to look at the neighborhood right next to yours. Some of these grants actually would work well if you have consortium of school districts. counties, right? You do regional grants, you do larger pieces, because then you actually shift the burden and you alleviate some of that. I do think that requires us to stop thinking from this scarcity mentality that we have to compete with our neighbors to this abundance mentality that if we all work together, we actually can bring something larger into the whole place.
I love that. Yeah, I think grants are often a wedge between potential allies, and the sorts of funding streams we're talking about should be facilitating more partnership and again, that collective work. So I'm particularly excited about these opportunities because I appreciate that level of abundance mindset that it hopefully introduces to the field. So really helpful to hear a little bit more from someone who's been successful in, again, managing these processes and securing the dollars. Would love to do a whip around before we close the panel out to hear just a little bit more about this idea of competitiveness. We are talking about competitive as opposed to formula grants today. And there's a question about how to just make sure that you have the strongest application, you're putting your best foot forward. So I'd love to go through team by team and just hear a little bit more about, in the context of the grants that you're most focused on, how the folks here can be best positioned to compete. So maybe we can start with the folks at HUD. What is it going to look like for a place-based organization to really differentiate themselves as they're seeking a choice neighborhoods opportunity?
This is actually a timely topic to talk about. As I mentioned, we put out a couple of NOFAs every year, and they can be competitive. So, my advice would be to read the NOFA carefully and respond to everything that's in the NOFA and make sure that you follow all the directions. We are actually working on doing a video that we're going to be posting on YouTube that will address the planning grant NOFA that's going to be coming out sometime in the near future. And we go over each rating factor item by item, making sure that that potential applicants understand what we're looking for and how they can put their best foot forward in our NOFAs. Certainly you want to make sure you submit it on time. We have had those that fail to submit by the deadline, but I think paying attention, making sure that you know what your strategies are and your ideas are, you're reflecting them in the application. Kylene, do you have any other suggestions?
No, I think you've said it best. Really looking at those NOFA questions, and there's usually little sub questions, and just making sure you're trying to address those.
Right.
Great, thank you. Yeah, hate to lose out an opportunity like this based on a technicality. So dotting the I's and crossing the T's, of course, as the baseline, but then thinking more creatively about how to tell that story. Helpful advice, thank you. So Elson, we've talked about a couple of funding streams on the Department of Ed side, both full service and promise. So I imagine there may be some unique competitive priorities for each program and maybe some common threads, but we'd love to hear more from you directly on what you think can sort of position folks for a competitive opportunity there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Haley. One of the things I think is critically important from the Department of Education standpoint is for applicants to look at the Secretary's supplemental priorities. That gives you a sense of the direction from which the administration is going. So that's one thing. Another is to look at our successful applications. So literally all of our programs post the successful applications on our websites. So get a sense for those successful applications, how they address our selection criteria. So you want to look at the selection criteria, and then how they are writing to those selection criteria. And then lastly, I would ask you all as applicants to think about what's unique about your community and your partnerships. I think that's incredibly important. And for Promise Neighborhoods and full service community schools, you all are going to have to think about those memorandum of understanding. Think about what it means to really drive data. And then I call it the tail of the tape. And that is, what would a partner say if a federal agency came to them and said, what is unique about what you're doing? So the tail of the tape is, if I come to your community and I ask a partner or your average resident what you all are doing, they should be able to tell you that. They should be able to tell me that. And that's critically important because your regular resident should understand what your partnership is about in a simple term and should be able to vouch for you.
I love that. Thank you, Elson. It sounds like not only having a story to tell, but really having alignment about how that narrative takes shape across partners and community members. So we're all kind of on one accord. I love the fact that at HCZ, there are many different ways we experience the programs and initiatives here, but I think we are united in this sense of whatever it takes to combat the cycle of intergenerational poverty. If you walk down 125th Street, you'd be finding a few folks who would say the same thing. So that idea of connectedness in the storytelling really hits home. So Aaron, on the AmeriCorps side, I know your applicants are probably different shapes and sizes, maybe a little more differentiated, but on the baseline level, how do you think about a well-positioned applicant for bringing in sort of core staff to deploy place-based work?
You know, the NOFA is like the least splashiest document. It's pretty dry, but it is the source. It is the tool that we have to communicate and telegraph to all of you the things that the agency is looking to support. So I cannot, echo what my colleagues have said, that the NOFO is the place to start. You have to start there. You have to understand all of those different pieces. It is painstakingly crafted, and there's a lot of thought to every line that's in there for a reason. So I, come back to that. For us, we do offer webinars for different components related to our NOFOs, and so would encourage folks to take advantage of that and to piggyback on what Elson said. The open government materials on the website, again, not particularly splashy, but if you want to go and look at successful applications, and depending on the competition, you can see different components like the review matrix and different things like that. So I do think it's worth a little poke around in some of these, hidden places on the website that really are rich with information. For us too, we also have a series of opportunities that are non-competitive that we can work together, particularly for AmeriCorps Vista and AmeriCorps NCCC. And if you're really looking for that on-ramp, that might be the place to start, because our staff can actually work with you on the concept paper and work with you, like flesh out the idea and consult with you. So there are these bigger competitive opportunities, and then these smaller non-competitive opportunities where we can actually work together to think through the program model and all of the different components. So I think if that feels too much at this moment, we can start with some of the smaller non-competitive opportunities, and would encourage folks to think about that.
That's great. So right-sizing the opportunity for your organization is positioned sounds like an important thing to keep in mind. There's a menu available, so once you understand that level of readiness and the sort of right match, could be worth pursuing. So if you can close us out, Dreama, you shared a lot of wisdom about what it's taken to get your organization to this place. Any other sort of pro tips or recommendations you'd share with the group on just how to position yourself well and what to keep in mind when you're actually doing the thing?
Yeah, I think the first thing is do your research. Like Elson and Aaron said, look at the NOFA, right? Look at the funded proposals, but this is not cut and paste. You cannot take one of those funded proposals and put your name in there and say you're going to do all of that. First of all, the reviewer would see through it. Second of all, it would be horrible if you got funded because you couldn't do all of that, right? So I think the second piece is you have to design based on your own place. I do think there's a tendency also to go into what we call in Appalachia poverty porn, where they spend a lot of time just talking about how bad our neighborhood is and how everything, and we need this money because of this. Mm-hmm. But that's not respectful. But it also, a reviewer will see if it's that bad off, how would you do this sophisticated program? And these programs are sophisticated programs. So I do think it's how do you start to think about your work from an asset base? And then the third is, how do you share not just the data that's on the website that everybody could get, but what are residents thinking? What are young people thinking, right? Do all of your work so that you actually can bring resident and youth voice in. To me, that's what helps with the asset-based piece of it. And then I think the other piece is remembering that you have to do what you say. And Elson, I've actually had a program officer call a school in the middle of the summer and say, hey, do you know this Gear Up program? Because you're listed as one of the partners. And luckily, the person who answered the phone in the summer knew the program, and they're like, oh yeah, that's that partnership, and that's this, right? So I do think that when you do this, there's a high level of accountability, and so bring that integrity piece in. I
love that. Thanks so much, Dream, and thank you to the whole panel for these really powerful perspectives. We know that we've got some seasoned veteran grant managers and deployers of this capital on the call. We've also got some folks who are new to the federal space, so I think we had a really nicely rounded perspective on what it takes if you're just considering versus how to sort of manage this in the long run. And we'll be distributing some more resources to help folks kind of think through next steps after the webinar. But before we close, I'm really excited to welcome two partners of ours who have been really critical in this work in the orbit of the Wilson Institute. Ben Lewis, who's been helping us think through a lot of different ways we might leverage these unique federal opportunities. And Robert Fisher from Results for America, who's been particularly laser focused on the ARP dollars and how we might leverage these recovery resources to advance place-based work. So Ben, can you get us started?
Sure, thanks, Haling. First, we wanted to highlight some specific funding opportunities through the federal infrastructure bill that are available to advance cradle-to-career and place-based work. So the federal infrastructure bill was passed on November 15th in 2021. In total, $1.2 trillion was appropriated for infrastructure projects. And of that $1.2 trillion, $578 billion was appropriated for new projects and new initiatives. As you can see by this pie chart, a big portion of the money is going towards roads and bridges, power infrastructure, rail, and broadband. We are excited that out of the 380 funding opportunities in the infrastructure bill, there are 15 that are directly related to place-based or cradle-to-career work that we want to share with you. The breakdown for what those 15 funding opportunities are: there's 6 for broadband, 3 in workforce development, 2 for roads and buildings, and 4 in clean energy upgrades. As Haling mentioned, we have a breakdown of all of these opportunities, what they are, who is eligible to apply, what the allowable uses are, and the amount of funding that's available for each of the 15 opportunities, which we will share with you after this webinar. But for now, we just wanted to highlight 2 example opportunities that you can consider. The first is the Energy Efficient Materials Pilot Program. In total, $50 million has been appropriated for this program. The application will be released early in 2023, and nonprofits can use this money for energy efficient upgrades to their buildings. The second program that we wanted to highlight is the Digital Equity Competitive Grant Program, which is essentially intended to enhance equity as it relates to digital infrastructure. So in total, $1.25 billion is appropriated over 5 years. State agencies, Indian tribes, nonprofits, school districts, or a partnership of any of those entities can apply to enhance digital equity in underserved areas. Some examples of what that could look like are building digital networking technology, creating jobs to do this, creating or improving public access computing centers, or providing training programs in underserved communities. We're really excited about what's involved in the infrastructure bill, and we are looking forward to sharing more of this information with you after the webinar. Now I'll hand it over to my colleague, Robert Fisher from Results for America, to talk a little bit about the American Rescue Plan Act.
Hey, good afternoon, folks. I'm Robert Fisher, Senior Advisor at Results for America. As Haling alluded in the intro of this section, I've served as a sort of policy coach and navigator for several place-based partnerships across the country, specifically focused on the American Rescue Plan. So I want to provide a little bit of an overview of the overall act and then dive into 2 specific programs that I think are very relevant to this group. So overall, the American Rescue Plan Act was passed March 11th, 2021, a $1.9 trillion investment in individuals and communities. As Jeffrey Canada mentioned at the top of this event, historic opportunity to transform communities and make some really catalytic investments in the things we know will move the needle on economic opportunity for kids and families. As you can see here, some big buckets. So $122 billion for education, almost $850 billion for individual relief, almost $350 million for state and local fiscal relief funds, and then another $550 billion for a range of programs, including childcare, rental assistance, WIC, all the programs that provide a lot of that safety net infrastructure. And then you can kind of see on the slide here how things have been distributed by different subgroups, whether they're state education agencies or local education agencies or cities and counties. I want to dive a little bit into the state and local fiscal relief fund. When folks say ARPA, this is typically the pot of funds they're thinking about. These are some of the most flexible resources available to cities, counties, and states to meet the range of needs in their communities. These funds can be spent on addressing public health needs. They can address negative economic impacts of COVID-19. They can also address a range of sort of community infrastructure needs, whether it's small businesses or legitimate infrastructure around broadband. To Ben's point, some of the funds available in ARPA actually complement the Infrastructure and Jobs Act. And so as you all think about the ways to partner with your state and local governments, these funds, the state and local fiscal relief funds, can be really important places to make strategic investments in supporting kids and families and kickstarting programs that can persist well after ARPA funds expire. Another big portion of funds is the Education and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, known as ESSER. There are several ESSER funds. This is ESSER 3 included in ARPA, but there are also ESSER 1 and 2 that were included in the first and second pandemic stimulus packages. This fund, one thing I really want to highlight, at RFA, we think about data and evidence quite a bit. 20% of these funds have to go to evidence-based interventions to address sort of accelerating learning for students. So this is a really important priority in a way that you can provide support to your public sector partners and school districts as they'll be thinking about a number of ways to support students' learning, whether it's through high impact tutoring or summer learning. The rest of those funds are really flexible, tons of ways to address the needs of students, whether they're low-income students, disabled students, students with disabilities, or English language learners. And there are both state and local funds there to be distributed. So that's an opportunity to lean in and support your community with some really important investments. And then last slide, there are a couple of resources just to give you a general sense of what's happening in the ARPA space. So Results for America partnered with Mathematica to review all of the interim spending reports that cities, states, and counties, as well as tribal nations, have submitted to Treasury. So you can go to our website and see how communities are spending ARPA funds in a range of different categories, how they're thinking about evidence, how they're thinking about community voice in their spending priorities. Another resource that offers a different sort of slice of that information is the Local Government ARPA Investment Tracker, which is a collaboration between the National Association of Counties, National League of Cities, and Brookings. They also provide tons of resources and insight into how communities are spending their ARPA funds. So if you're looking for inspiration or ideas, that's a really great place. And then the last resource for ESSER funds in particular, the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education and the Federal Department of Education has a ton of resources, but something that I find extraordinarily valuable is a repository of all of the ESSER plans that states have submitted. And so you can take a look at how other states are leveraging their ESSER funds to meet the needs of students in their schools. So we'll stop there and turn it back to the folks at HCZ, but know that we will be following up with other resources so folks can get a sense of how ARPA and ESSER funds are being distributed across the country. Thanks.
All right. Ben and Robert, thank you so much for that information. We could have spent just an afternoon with you all sort of combing through all these available opportunities, but a helpful snapshot at a high level, really useful to have the perspective of folks who have gone deep in these areas, and we'll be excited to share more offline. So folks who are registered will receive additional information about these opportunities from both our panelists and our guest presenters, along with a survey, because we want to make sure we can continuously improve and tailor these learning experiences to the needs of the field. So we're excited to be cultivating these learning opportunities for the place-based field going forward, and we hope that you'll be joining us in the future for these. For now, thank you again to our great partners from both the federal government, place-based partnerships, our national partners, for making this panel happen, making this entire conversation possible. And for those who are interested in learning more, please keep in touch with us at the William Julius Wilson Institute at HCZ. We're looking forward to engaging you more in the near future and wish you well.